Hi folks, hopefully you can see me all okay now. Like I say, obviously please feel free to ask questions as we go along, but my aim is to really talk through the kind of structures around how we think about how to break the UA glass ceiling. And obviously I'll explain what I mean by that as well. Then about half an hour in, we're going to invite Adam Betteridge from Buzz Capital to come on camera, and he and I are going to have a chat about how we're using a different way of funding, but so that we can make that difference, to make the change that we need to be able to get the level of success in user acquisition that we want. So let's kick off. So what do we mean by the UA glass ceiling? So we think that at the moment it's quite difficult, particularly for smaller developers, to get established in the current market. There's so much competition, there's so many changes going on with the removal of IDFA, which is the Apple's ID for advertisers, which was removed as part of iOS 14.5, and also the addition of new platforms, new choices, new regulations. We're actually doing some work at the moment with the ICO for the children's code. So there's a whole bunch of changes and activities going on. There's a lot of pressure on teams to be able to find ways to successfully get their games out in front of the audience. But of course, in order to do that, you need to fund it. And either you're going to have to pay for it yourself, or you're going to have to find ways to be able to prove that your game has the potential to gain the revenue that's needed when you spend the money. You need to prove what we call a return on advertising spend. Increasingly in mobile, and to a certain extent on PC as well, and not so much on console because that's a different beast, but we are seeing a lot of studios getting involved later and later in the process, which means more and more pressure is being put onto the developer themselves. It's already a risky proposition, but we're finding that a lot of studios are struggling to get development funding, let alone marketing funding. And there are a lot of studios out there still trying to be self-published, which is great, and we want to try and help those folks too. But the key thing I want to get across is there is a barrier, and how we get past that barrier is by finding data and proving that the game we have has the potential to break through and be found. That's really the challenge. There are so many games out there that just don't succeed because they don't utilize the data, they don't provide the right level of marketing. Now, I'm focusing on UA, so I'm focusing on the no-nonsense, direct response type of marketing. I'm not going to talk about App Store optimization. I'm not going to talk about social media and social messaging or social marketing. I'm not going to talk about influencer marketing, although there's a certain element of crossover with all these pieces. I'm talking about UA as a general principle, where we can basically provide normally an ad. A 30-second video ad is my favorite. I think that's the gold standard. And that ad drive a user to come and download the game and then start playing the game, hopefully watch some ads, or pay up front or pay in game. Almost certainly not the pay up front, but that's a different subject. But we want to then get a revenue. So how do we get to prove that? So the way we propose that people have to prove that is they have to look at what it's going to cost you to get games inside and look at what success looks like, because your cost of acquisition might be fairly constant. Well, maybe not quite, but for all intents and purposes, that's their constant. But the retention level of the users is going to drop off remarkably. But contrary to that, you're going to see over time, the revenue per user is going to increase in general, especially when you're talking about a game that's got in-app purchases, especially when you're talking about a game that uses ad funding. For ad funding to work, you've got to have a huge number of users watching ads on a regular basis. But it works very well when you've got hybrid style games that have got both in-app purchase and ads. So what do we need to do? We need to know that when we spend money on ads, that we're going to get the uplift we need, that we're going to get the audience we need, but most importantly, we're going to get the revenue that we need to justify spending again. That means we need to collect evidence. Some interesting stuff when you look at advertising spend. Quite often what happens is you don't just see the number of, amount of money spent, the number of installs, and that's it. Often when you spend money on user acquisition, you actually see an uplift in the organic spend. As you start to talk about your game, more people start talking about your game. And sometimes you have this indirect connection between somebody seeing an ad and sometime later deciding they're going to seek out your game, go to the App Store, download it themselves without going directly through the app. So knowing how influential that is, how influential your communication strategies are, is going to be really important. So we try to look at what is the total ad spend, what's the total increase and effect on your installs. How does that translate into revenue per user? And we look at differences between the level of spend for organic users versus the level of spend for audiences from one source or a different source. So we can optimize the whole piece around your audience, not just do we have one ad and does it work, but where do we place that ad? Which platform are we using? What kind of behaviors are we getting? It's really fascinating when you go under the bonnet and you realize that sometimes you target an ad and you're just getting reach, so lots of people seeing it, but it's not converting to revenue. Other times you might have a limited audience, but that audience happens to convert to spend really well. And each kind of audience can have a different value. You have to understand that in the whole piece of your marketing strategy. So we have to think about and crucially deeply understand targeting and testing. Now, this is becoming more challenging, and I'll talk a little bit about why. But essentially, we still, whatever the whys and wherefores, we still have to use the tools which are available to us legitimately and authentically use that to target our audience. But to do that, we need to understand who our audience is. Now, fundamentally, what we try to do is break down audiences based around the behaviors in a game. So we look at a game, we break it down into layers. We look at the mechanic, the thing that you do. We look at the context, which is really the kind of sense of purpose of progression. And we look at the metagame. So that's where the things that aren't the game connect. So social layers, the mode of use of the game, the lifestyle fit of the game, all of these cultural kind of zeitgeist members of this sort of memeability of the game. And if you think about games in that way, it's really useful because you can say, okay, let's use my primary. People I'm designing the game. My primary audience, might be Ahmed 24, IT support worker. He's a self-confessed gamer. He thinks he thinks he could be an esport player. He plays every day. He thinks that the game needs more guns. Whatever the lines are, but let's understand them. Let's make a hypothesis. Let's think about who they are, and then test it, and then move forward. So that's the guy who we're making the game for. Now we've got Jackie, who's 44. She's a blogger. She's an active gamer, but she doesn't talk about it. She's the kind of person who we know would like this game, but probably wouldn't sort of get hugely involved unless there's something special about the way the game delivers a sense of purpose and progression. So by knowing that, we can now start being more we can infer more information about the kinds of nuance we want to convey in the way we target and the messages that we share with our audience in the promotions that we do. And here's our tertiary audience. So Riley is a student, 19, content creator, has low level of subscribers, but they're the third level of audience in this particular random example I'm making. Now, we've got a really clear idea from breaking down our audience into 3 types of people, the kinds of common channels and common messages we want to use to communicate. That's really kind of the key there. So, of course, I've talked about people, but we have to bear in mind when we're talking about people that we've got to pay attention to their privacy. And privacy has become a huge issue of late. Apple removes, as I said, the IDFA from the latest release of their iOS. They now have a new system called ATT, which is all about app transparency, and a thing called Sky Network, which is basically a different way where people can track the opt-in part of advertising. In fact, a lot of different ad providers are already supporting this. If you have ads in your game, you probably want to make sure that you follow through all of the instructions about how do you make sure in Xcode that your game takes note of those systems. But either way, there will be a group of people who opt in and a group of people who opt out. What can we do about that? Well, the answer is we don't try too hard. We just try to do what we can with the information we have. If we can look at people who have liked certain types of games, if we can find mechanisms to target them, whether that's through Facebook, whether that's through other means, whether that's through making sure we've got placement of our ads into games that are like our game or that have a similar audience to our game. We can make some inferences, but it won't be as directly targeted as historically was possible. That doesn't mean it's not good. It might not be quite as effective, but it should still be workable. And in fact, it's still as just important. My view is that it's going to have a bigger effect on people who are trying to target the largest possible audience. If you're trying to make market reach, extended market share, then it's going to be, I think, more expensive for you. So if you're in the big boys, it's going to be more expensive for you to dominate a market, I suspect. But if you're trying to prove the possibility of your game and the potential of your game, I think there is still plenty of opportunity. Just you need to look for other ways to stand out. And the way we do that is we test. So we start small. We basically check whether the ideas that we have, the creative, the targeting, the art style of the game, the gameplay itself, all have to be an integrated view. And we test. We look at, does it work? Yes, great, carry on. If it doesn't, no, start again, keep going. Failure isn't just always an option, it's something we should embrace. But that means we have to be careful about how we spend. So if you're going to create a campaign which is testing, let's do an initial CPI test. Maybe we haven't even built the game yet. Let's learn from what Hyper Casual has done really well. Even if you've got a game that's going to be a massive game as a service eventually, let's start out by just checking that the art style, the game mechanics, the principle of the game is possible to communicate in just 30 seconds of a video ad, and that it's desirable. If we can prove that, if we can show, and a typical example of a mobile game would be, if we can prove a cost per install, in other words, the cost for people to press a button that says download now, if that's less than 40 cents, then we're probably okay. Now, if it's a hyper casual game, we've got to be a bit more demanding. It's got to be less than 30 cents. Now, again, these numbers are, finger in the air. They're changing all the time. You've got to keep aware of what's working for your game and compare it with other games. But obviously, this is not data everyone's sharing. That's why I spend a lot of time at conferences, moderating panels and talking to game developers, because I want to keep access to what the latest numbers are. So what else are we looking for? So as well as doing, a video trailer, we need to test what the adoption, what the interest level is for our audience themselves. So what we tend to do fundamentally is we go and do a usability test. So that means we'll use somewhere like Playtest Cloud or Antidote, and we'll basically run, say, 30-minute gameplay test with 4 or 5 users. It's not hugely expensive, 500 quid, 600 quid, something like that. But what it means is that we can very quickly get a completely independent view of the gameplay that's not affected by their personal knowledge of us. Anyone who's done any market research, anyone who's done any qualitative research will know that if you are there, you will subconsciously influence the response. There is something about human reactions which makes people want to give you the answers they think you want. Well, one of the joys of having these third-party platforms is we cut them out. The people who do that play are nothing to do with their success or enjoyment of the game. They're getting paid to participate and give honest feedback. And if we don't believe their feedback, we don't pay them. That's it. We do get somebody else. So by doing that process, we can actually see what people actually do. Not blinkered by the design thinking or the planning or the years of experience we have as game developers. We also get a survey. And in that survey, we ask one particular question. We might ask lots of other questions as well, but the particular question we ask is, would you recommend this game to a friend? That question is amazingly effective. It is one of the best ways to get as close to objective responses from people about how good your game or service is. If you ask someone, would they recommend it to a friend? They are vastly more likely to be actually honest about their feelings about the game. And so typically we're looking for a 7 out of 10 net promoter score. That's what they call that phrase, net promoter score from the game. If we've got the low level of CPI and we've got the net promoter score and we can also prove good retention, we've already reduced the risks of our success dramatically. So basically, if we can get day one of around 40%, I'd probably be okay with a game as a service game at 35, but I'd probably expect to have a casual game. I'd need 60% day one retention. For day 7, I'll be looking at 20, maybe 25 in some cases for solid retention games, but maybe for a hyper casual, I might be happier with 15%, just because we know there's such a steep drop off in terms of a hyper casual game. When I get to a day 30, I may be okay with a 2 to 3% for a hyper casual game, but I want 5, maybe even 10% at high level for a more retaining game or a longer term game experience. If we get those numbers right, then I think we're ready to look at how effective the game revenue model is. But let's move on. Before we do that, let's talk about the trailer itself, creative. Quite often you'll have talks about UA that don't even talk about the ad itself. I think that we are fundamentally not putting enough attention into the quality of how we communicate. In a 30-second ad, we have a lot of things we've got to communicate. You've got to get the awareness of your game immediately. You've got like 3 to 6 seconds to get people to get something recognizable in that ad that they immediately understand what it is they're looking at. We need to create some interest. We need to motivate them from that awareness to intrigue, challenging their perception, to get them to want to know more about the ad, to finish watching the ad, to actually pay attention to the ad, given that we know a lot of people will be going through a lot of rewarded ads, look, and then they turn the phone over, wait till it's over and go back to playing again. Or they're playing a hyper casual game and they're in rest mode. So there's an ad going there. How do we make sure we pique their interest and importantly set a desire that is so strong that it drives them to a reason to act? Your trailers need to give players an amazingly, precise purpose to act and download that game. And you have to do all of that in 30 seconds in such a way that when they get to your game, when they've gone from the install to play and they start playing the game, there's a resonance, there's a cognitive resonance that connects them to the gaming experience so that they feel positive about it, that you fulfilled the promise. And that fulfillment of the minimum viable promise, as I often like to call it, that is what's going to feed into retaining those users. Now, don't get me wrong, there are games out there that use a technique known as bait and switch, where they'll show some simple puzzle game or some kind of crazy variation of gameplay that they're just testing out the waters on. And you get to the real game and it's nothing like that. But you're there, it's just a click to install. You might as well have a look at it. It's not a game you wouldn't want to play, so you do. And they can be effective. They get numbers of people through. They don't necessarily get revenue through. But what you've done is, especially for a game as a service, you've sent people down up the wrong type of expectation. And so you're going to be in an uphill battle trying to engage them with the true nature of your game. And you've also already done that on the basis of basically not being authentic. So I'm not a fan of bait and switch ads. I do understand why people do them. Hopefully I've explained that. But what I want you to take away from this is the better way to do it is to look at your 30-second ad and break it into how I'm going to generate awareness, interest, desire, action, but underlying it, how I'm going to leave a promise that's going to lead to retention once the game is installed. Of course, that all sounds great, but at the same time, we've got to do the impossible, which is we've got to show simplicity. Simplicity is not easy. Simplicity is complicated. Some of the best writers in the UK write on a newspaper called The Sun, which is a really horrible newspaper. I'm not a fan of it. However, I am completely respect the writers. Actually, I know a couple of them. A friend of mine is an editor on The Sun, and if I go to school, and they have to be so good that they can write for an 8-year-old reading age. You try doing that. That is non-trivial. Simplicity is incredibly hard. Communicating ideas simply and ways that are engaging, enticing, and deliver on promises requires a lot of thought. You see people coming up with brand ideas and go, why did someone spend £500,000 on that stupid logo? The amount of work that's gone into every little nuance, every little part of the message, and the targeting, and the way the resonance between the particular story of the day and the gameplay mechanic, all of those things have been considered. You need to do that too. You need to make sure that people can look at what you're going to create in terms of the ad, the messaging, the links, the App Store pages, and make sure that when you click the button, you know why I want to play this game now. And I probably hinted there that one of the key important things that comes out of that is the realization that we have to integrate our thinking. We need synergy. I know it's a horrible word. I know people don't like it. I love the word synergy, but everyone seems to hate it. I think synergy is an amazing thing. If we can create an integration between the identity of our game, the art of the game, the buttons of the game, the UX of the game, the social messages of the game, the community desires and passions in the game, the messaging inside the game, the way that we're talked about by newspapers, by trade press, and so on and so forth. If we can create a unified experience and deliver that in a recognizable trailer where everything works out, is aligned, is desirable, we're communicating a lot more power for a lot less. So I impeach you, please think about how you can be consistent in your art style, in your messaging, in your targeting, and make sure that you're sending a message that people are going to be willingly and openly desiring that message, so that you can deliver effective delivery of your game to the right audience. This is why it's so important to start thinking about those three types of audiences, even from the very first day you start thinking about the game. Arguably, you shouldn't be making a game unless you already know who you're making it for. So what does this all mean? Why am I talking about this? Well, I'm talking about this because of the approach that we're taking, which is basically a UA testing process. So we have come up with an approach where before we have proof of the return on advertising spend, how we are going to help studios get to that point. And whether you're working with us or not, you can take this same approach. And that basically means stepping back through this process. So let's take out the subjective and make it objective. So let's have KPIs. Let's start by looking at the initial cost per install. We can test that early on, as I said, before we've even got a game, in the same way that a lot of hyper-casual games are doing it. Doesn't matter what our game is, we can take that same technique to a simple, maybe it's a Facebook ad, maybe it's to a fake web page, and we can get an immediate understanding of the likely cost per install just by looking at how much it costs to get someone to click their download button. And once we've got that, we can do the usability test. So we can prove that the game itself lives up to the expectations that were set in our trailer. And if we do that, we get an idea of our net promoter score. And that net promoter score tells us, would you recommend it to a friend? If we have a high net promoter score, the likelihood that we're going to get that retention, that we're going to get the social push, that we're going to get the virality that are going to drive and sustain that game, the likelihood that the ads are going to ring true when they are presented goes up. So let's get that net promoter score. And once we've got those lined up, let's retest the cost per install by building up a beta audience. And by building up a beta audience, we're starting to push into a wider group of people. And let's build on that over time. And so we can start finding out what our day 1 retention is, what our day 30 retention is. And once we know our day 30 retention, let's work out our return on advertising spend. At that point, that's when we're going to spend a more significant amount of money to see whether the money we spend on ads is returned or not. If we can get day 30, 120% return on ad spend, we're looking really good. In fact, one of the things that's really important there is if we have a more than day 30 retention and we're getting a 30-day 120% retention, the chances that we're going to be able to get much greater return on investment, much greater lifetime value over 60, 90, 120 days, that is where we can start turning into a profitable business. Not just a game that's got an audience, but a business. And that is what we're after in the end. So let's build up a process where we've got these objective gates. We've already predefined what success looks like before we get to them. And then we can go from readiness to test to launch, and then we can scale. At the point of launch, we should have that return on advertising spend measured. And then we can justify the bigger spend so we can scale. The nice thing about this is we keep the testing process. We keep looking at adapting our trailers, our content. We keep testing and adapting our targeting and optimizing. We will find that our scale will grow over time in the most cost-effective way possible. Of course, you're going to reach a point where the halo effects of the game will start to diminish. You may get to the point where you have to do more maintenance rather than looking at the kind of reach, the grab for more market share. But that's okay, because there are other things we can do at this point. We can start looking at the retention levels and starting to optimize them. We can start looking at how we can maximize the revenue per user. But these are questions for once you get to launch. Getting to launch, getting to the point where we know we've got a good solid return on advertising spend, that's the point where we know we've broken through the glass ceiling. That's what we're trying to achieve here. So the answer really for us is we want to find ways to help you and you to help yourselves to get to the point where you can do that short level testing and get to the point where you can break through the glass ceiling and see success for your game. So that's really kind of the key core of what the webinar is about. But obviously, it's not just about that. To do all of this, what we've had to do is to find ways of funding this. And so we've actually started working with Adam Betteridge at Buzz Capital. I'm going to invite Adam to join us. And basically, the idea is that we want to basically talk to Adam and ask a few questions for him and have a conversation about how we've gone about getting that funding, but also wider conversations around funding of game-related items as well. So Adam, how are you doing?
Great, nice to meet you all, and thanks very much for asking me to join.
Cool. So Adam, I've got a whole bunch of questions. Obviously, you and I have been chatting for a very long time about these things. Do you want to just tell everybody a little bit about your background and what your involvement with games is?
Sure. My name, as Oscar says, Adam Betteridge. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Buzz Capital. And by the way, if you've got any questions about financing that might occur to you as I kind of go through these questions with Oscar, please just pop them into the chat. We'll probably deal with them at the end, but at least we've got them there to look at later on. Effectively, Buzz Capital provides funding to a range of different sectors. In fact, we've worked across the creative industries, film, TV, video games, of course, music and theatre. And also we do quite a bit of work around research and development across a number of sectors too. And we also have quite a strong property division. And we are typically involved in two sort of main areas of funding. One is raising equity. So we've done a number of equity raises, some games companies, in fact, including Fundamentally Games, where we raise funding through SEIS, EIS. And we also provide debt financing, which is actually our main focus at the moment. And I just want to say with debt financing can be a bit of a scary word for a lot of people. We're kind of sort of trained, aren't we, from an early age to think about debt as being bad. But hopefully I'll be able to give some positive ideas or put some positive ideas in your head about how you can make debt financing really work for you.
Yeah, I used to think that debt was a dirty word for a long time, but I've actually found it really kind of a revelation, getting to know Adam and the last few years and how we've really changed our whole strategy so that we can actually unlock our potential as a publisher, because we can use this facility where we can draw when we need to run the tests when we need. We'd have to go off and find some investor to take a percentage of our company. We already know the risk. We can already quantify that. We can target that appropriately. But enough about us for now. We'll come back to that. So as an organisation, Adam, Buzz has a history with a range of industries, movies, property, and of course games. What is it about games that you find interesting?
Well, I love games. I think we're all here because we love games. So may as well just put my hand up and say, I've been playing games for years. In fact, me and a business partner, Marcus, who I work with at Buzz, used to share a PC when we were at school together, and we always used to gather around it and get our mates around and play, have a great time playing late into the night. I've got a PlayStation. I play on my mobile. I'm lucky to get an Oculus Quest 2, which is great fun. So we love games fundamentally, it's interesting actually coming at it from this perspective of looking across a range of different sectors because games has obviously been growing as a sector for years now at a tremendous rate of growth, and I think just a couple of years ago it outstripped the film industry, and I think even sports combined.
I think it's about 10 years now, Adam, that we've outstripped movies and box office movies and music.
Yeah, well, I was going to add sports actually. So
yeah,
really? Film and sports combined. It's doing tremendously well as a sector. And in fact, watching what's been going on with, obviously the lockdown, that has helped kind of emphasize its resilience and its versatility. I think that looking at some statistics from UK, the UK games industry grew or outstripped the previous year's targets by a billion pounds at £7 billion for that 1 year. So it's grown tremendously over the last year. And interesting, Oscar, I don't know if you know this, but I think our demographic, 46 to 54-year-olds, it actually was one of the fastest or the largest growing demographics. I think it spiked to 60% with around a 75% increase in amount spent in our demographic. So good on our demographic.
Yeah, good on our. I mean, like I said, I'm still in that age group. Just the other one that was interesting was the largest group still remains. I think it's 35 to 45-year-old women on mobile. The single largest group of players, and that changed. If you think about when we were first playing games on our PCs, I think about playing Doom, realizing I've now had lunch with those guys since. Anyway, but when you think about that kind of experience, 20, 30 years ago, it feels like that we'd never have been. We were told that we were the losers sitting in the dark. I'm sure there's a Marcus Briggs joke I should make about this at the point, but I won't spoil it. But it's amazing how the whole industry is completely transformed, and now 1/3 of the population of the planet.
Absolutely, and I think when comparing it, say, to the film industry, and then this is where it gets so interesting when you're looking at the data that you can sort of utilize to drive decisions, which is part of what we're all here talking about today. Is in the film industry, it tends to be relatively subjective when you're creating what is essentially a product, which is generally released once it's been completed, and once it's completed, it's completed. There's not really much more you can do to it. But with games, and obviously the concept of living games, that we're able to sort of check our decisions at each stage of the process, just to make sure that we're still doing everything as well as we can, and make tweaks and improvements in order to help make better and better decisions moving forward. Even if that decision is to actually stop working in a particular game, because obviously if something's not working, you can make a decision to say, what, this really just isn't working. I'm going to have to go back to the beginning and start again. But all of this helps save money and time in the long run, and so this is one of the sort of main sort of features of the games industry that I find absolutely fascinating, and sort of underpins the kind of UA testing fund that we're obviously here to talk about today.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a cliche, but in games, particularly if we're doing living games, we're either earning or learning. So it doesn't really kind of, at the end of the day, it's always about what we can do next. So let's pursue this piece about the work that you're doing fundamentally, and particularly as Buzz. I think like I said earlier, one of the key things that was always holding us back from being able to take that step into publishing was having to have a war chest. And what was it about the kind of the pitch that we gave you that really resonated, that made you feel like, yeah, this is something we want to step into? This idea of doing user testing, creating a user testing program prior to this sort of typical user funding, UA funding process.
Sure. Well, I mean, a big part of it was the fact that it was you guys pitching it to us. We've had a great time working with you guys over the years, and you know, you bring a wealth of experience, frankly, across both the creative and the business side of the sector. And I think you know, that puts you, well, it certainly helped us make better decisions when considering how to fund different types of businesses over time. So keep up the good work. And the concept of the UA testing fund, for us, well, you know, what you were really able to help us understand is how really a lot of publishers and traditional UA funders are sort of missing a bit of a trick, really. And this is that they aren't really able to help developers who aren't yet at the stage of having, you know, a really strong sort of story to tell in terms of their data. What I really like about the process that we put together here is that we're able to come in, you know, that one step earlier and help developers who are currently stuck below this glass ceiling, you know, who maybe don't yet have the ability to start scaling, and to get them to the point that they can start scaling. So, you know, we've got a methodology and a process
Absolutely.
we've worked out between us, which, you know, we feel really strongly about, and we're really looking forward to continuing sort of growing this part of our business. So we're not just funding on the UA testing side, but also then where we can get developers to the point that their data is strong enough to actually funding their full UA expenditure too.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, I think that's really the key for me as well. It's this idea that, you know, a lot of studios aren't getting the support that they need to be able to get their game ready for that kind of key data point. And I think, you know, one of the difficult things is trying to help studios understand what they need to do to get the game up to the spec. And if they're not getting the support from people who understand UA, if they're not getting the support from people who understand marketing design, targeting, information, data use, messaging, you know, the creation of actionable advertising, all of these pieces, if you don't have that support, if people don't get involved early enough to make a difference, then all of your efforts making an amazing gaming experience could be wasted. And that's what we're trying to avoid. I think earlier on you mentioned that you guys do things like tax credits and App Store receivables factory. I mean, do you want to talk a little bit more about any of those parts?
Sure. I mean, before we've been involved in the UA testing fund, what we're quite well known for is providing, as I say, debt-based facilities secured against things like tax credits and App Store receivables, and App Platform receivables too. And what I mean by receivables, so all of these three things are kind of receivables, but it's essentially when you're looking at your cash flow, it's some sort of piece of revenue that is coming along in the future that you won't have access until certain things are fallen into place. But that we're able to get a pretty clear idea of the sort of hoops that you have to jump through to getting to that stage. And assuming we can get comfortable with that, we're able to provide you with an advance secured against that piece of revenue so that you get it in your bank account today. I'll use the example of a tax credit if I can, because if you're based in the UK, which I think a number of you are, you may be aware that you're able to claim video games tax credit or the research and development tax credit. And anyone that's tried to go through this process, I mean, it's relatively straightforward. You apply to the BFI for a British qualifying status, assuming you get it. You can then include certain expenditure in your cash flow against a tax credit claim, which will then get paid at the end of your accounting period once you've submitted your corporation tax return to HMRC. So that's way, let's say that's way off in the future. You don't want to be waiting till, for 12 months, say, for that to happen. You want that money in your bank account now. So, like I say, we can provide an advance secured against that. And what I might just do, if anyone is interested, because we try to make this process as straightforward as possible, is to take you to a page on our website. And I've just dropped the link to the specific page into the chat. So hopefully you can all see that. And I'm now going to share my screen. So hopefully you can all see that. Helping businesses buzz with simple, straightforward finance. That's us. If you go to the Borrow tab at the top, Creative Industries, Video Games, Tax Relief, Loan here, you can see that we've got a page dedicated to this. And what we have, first of all, is our process. And basically, our process is in four stages. One is we have an online application form, which is a little bit further down the page. You see this big red button says click to here to apply. That's for that. But I'll come on to that in just a moment. So fill out our online application form. Based on that, we go to stage 2. We then issue you with a term sheet with some proposed terms for providing an advance. If you're happy with that, you sign it and send it back. Then we go to stage 3. We issue the legal paperwork for the loan. And if you're happy with that, you sign it, return those to us, and we then deposit the relevant funds into your bank account. And then we move to stage 4, which is once you have submitted your corporation tax return to HMRC, we are then repaid from that payment. So 4-stage process, there you go, nice and simple. We've got a few frequently asked questions just here, just in case you've got any other things pop into your heads. But if that all sounds good, like I said, you just click here to apply, the red button, and that is our online application form. Usually takes about 5 or 10 minutes to complete. We're just looking for some, it's a data capture exercise just to get an overview of your business and your tax credit claim. And of course, if all that sounds a bit much and you just want to talk to someone, ignore everything I just said and go to the contact page. You can fill in your details here, send us a message, and someone will get back in touch, or here's a phone number over there. You can just give us a ring, probably get put through to me, and we can find out what games we're playing. So that's pretty much how our tax credit process works. If you have any questions around that, like I said, just pop your message into the chat, and we can deal with that a bit later on.
Cool. And if anyone's got any questions about kind of the UA process, about any specifics in terms of UA, I've got so much more detail I can bore you with. But also, given that we have Adam here, if you've got any questions on kind of anything to do with the financing side of games, then obviously, feel free to ask. With that in mind, what other ways are you guys looking to help game devs?
Yeah, from time to time we do equity raises. So that's through the SEIS and EIS regime, which, if anyone who doesn't know, is basically a method of selling shares in your business to investors who can then claim certain tax reliefs on their investment. At the very high level, SEIS offers investors a 50% income tax benefit, and on EIS it's a 30% income tax benefit, which is a really nice way of adding some security for the investor to the proposition you might be putting in front of them. But like I say, our main focus at the moment is on debt funding. Another part of that is advancing against App Store and our platform revenues. Again, just go to our contact form and drop us a line if that's something that interests you. It's a bit more straightforward actually than tax credit funding, because we essentially just need to see the statement that you've received from, say, Apple or Google, or the relevant platform, and then provide an advance secured against that, which we repaid, whenever that revenue arises from the platform. So that's
Cool.
probably about the. Sorry, Oscar.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's all right. I think I'm getting a little bit of internet lag. I won't bore people with my problems with Virgin Media. But enough of that. I was just going to say, given that we have you here and your kind of huge experience in terms of investment in general, I do think it would be interesting at least to ask you what advice you'd give to a game developer who's looking to raise money.
I think probably the main thing I would say is uh, think about the finance source that you are applying to um, carefully, because and then tailor your pitch actually to what it is that they are looking for. The reason I mentioned this is because we work on both the debt and the equity side, but we often receive what I would say is a classic equity pitch um, um, from uh, from developers. And now an equity pitch is more about sort of high level vision and longer term prospects of your business. If I was putting on my debt hat for a moment, I would say, well, that's actually something that I would find quite hard to get my sort of teeth into, because what I'm looking for is something very much in the short term, an item on your cash flow, which, like I mentioned, we're able to secure our loan against. So it's just worth thinking about, is this a debt financier that I'm applying to, or is this an equity financier that I'm applying to? And actually, if both of those have a slightly different approach to a publisher, because of course a publisher has a deep understanding of the video game sector, way beyond your traditional equity fund or debt financier. So it might be that the sort of pitch that you would send to a publisher is too high level for them. So think about.
Actually, that's an interesting one. Sorry.
No, go for it. I think I finished there.
I just say that was again a lagging issue on my side. My apologies. I just think that's a really interesting, because that's something we see all the time, where people go with tell us it's an equity pitch, and it turns out when we're doing these meetings with various game developers, even if we're talking as a publisher, they tell us an equity pitch, but it's a publishing pitch, or it's an equity pitch and they're after publishing, and they never seem to know which it is. One pitch does not rule them all, sadly, because the differences are, I think, as you said, Adam, it's about knowing what's actually motivating the person at the other end of the conversation. If you don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, sometimes you might not get the kind of reply that you expect, I guess, if it's the wrong type of pitch. And what you don't want, I guess, is to get rejected by someone sort of on day one, just simply because they haven't fully understood what it is that you've sent to them. Again, happy to chat a bit more about what the sort of things different financiers might want. If you want to drop us a line at any point, very happy to kind of give you my two pennies worth on what I think from my own experience. I would also say, do think about debt financing, because I know debt, it has this sort of negative connotation, but it is a relatively cheap form of financing, and of course it is generally very short term. With equity financing, I mean, of course, this is also a very useful way of raising money, and should be seriously considered. But the issue there is that it's a long-term arrangement. Whoever it is you're selling shares in your business to, you're going to be in it with them for the long term. You want to make sure that your interests are entirely aligned, because you don't want to be sort of falling out, at any point in the future. Actually, you can't get that piece of your business back without buying it back. So it can actually be a quite expensive way of raising funding. With debt financing, shortest I guess we've provided loans for is a 3-month term, sometimes up to 12-month term, maybe even sometimes a bit longer. But once the loan is repaid, essentially that's it. We would never need to do business again, unless, of course, you wanted to come back to us for further lending. And this is an important part of what we do. We always want to make sure that people feel happy with our service, and that they would like to come back to us if they have further cash flow needs in future. So we don't just see it as a short-term thing. We do, in fact, see it as a long-term thing. But at each stage of the process, it's your choice whether or not you come back. And I guess it's the onus is on us to deliver you the best service we can to make you want to. So I hope that gives you a bit of an understanding of what we're all about anyway.
Absolutely. Cool. Actually, we've got a couple of questions, I think. First things first. So from Simon, it's a question for me, the first question. For a first test, how much is small and how long do you run it for? So when I'm talking about the first test, I'm talking about before we even have a proper game quite often. And I'm typically, although actually, to be honest, I've actually done this for games that are further down the line as well. But the very first test is this game got an interest? And that may be a one, well, it's a 3 to 5 day Facebook test is what we typically do. And we typically spend something like 50 to £100 per day on that test. So it does tend to be slightly more towards the £50 a day over 5 days rather than the £100 a day over 3 days. But that's the sort of level that we tend to do. The point is that it's a bit tricky to say and hard and fast rule because typically to optimize the performance on, say, a Facebook ad, it's going to take you 3 to 5 days before it starts kicking in the optimization. So you're not going to get a absolutely kind of true level of how good it could be. But in that first test, I'm not worried about that because optimization is a good thing. It'll improve my performance in general, in principle. At least it should do because I'll be optimizing my targeting and so on and so forth along the way. So that's why I'm quite happy to do a short-term tests, small amounts of money, just to know my first test is okay. Then I know it's worth doing the usability test. And that's all that KPI is intended to draw. Once I've got that usability test, then I'm able to do it again, and then I can spend a little bit more. So I might go from spending, $300 or so, so £200, that kind of level, £250. And then I might go for £500 for the next test. So not a lot more, but enough more. One of the key things in all of this, though, is I don't want to spend too much money that I get too big a reach, so I lose the halo effect that I get at launch. Because what I want to get to is I've done all of my checks before I do my return on advertising spend test, where I'm spending 5 to 10K on the one marketing campaign, lasting again 3 to 5, maybe 5 to 10 days, possibly. But I want that big hit, and I want that big hit to be as clean as possible. So that's why I don't want to spend more money earlier. That makes sense. So does that make sense, Simon? I'm hoping it does. In the meantime, I will ask Adam, equity raises. How does that work for companies that are located outside of the UK?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Simon. So for the type of equity raises that Buzz has been involved with, it has to date generally been for companies based in the UK. That is a part of the requirements under the SEIS and EIS regime, which enables the tax reliefs for the investors. But we can signpost to other funds that we have collaborated with who don't have the same requirement. It just means that you would be dealing with them rather than us.
Yeah,
we
I mean,
are actually
the
considering.
principle is just the. Oh, sorry.
That's all right. We are considering methods of being able to provide project-based financing, I should say, although that is yet to be knuckled down. But we hope that that would help support the kind of UA funding that we're currently providing at the moment.
So I'll just wait a little bit to make sure I haven't overtalked Adam again. That's my lag. Good. Okay, that's a good sign. We should put thumbs up when we know do that, only because my lag is so bad. Just to kind of reiterate that, I mean, the point that I think we should get across is when we're talking about SEIS and EIS, they are UK specific tax benefits for UK investors. Now, that doesn't mean that equity works any particularly differently in other territories. You're still talking about giving away a proportion of your company based on a valuation. The thing is that you might be looking at different tax benefits that you can rely on, or tax exemptions for the investors that you can rely on, and that will be territory to territory. I know in France they have a particularly good one, although I think it's capped at a certain level, in a similar way that our SEOs, our seed enterprise investment scheme, is capped at 150k, and our enterprise investment scheme, I think, is capped at, technically, I think it's 5 million, but it can go up to 7 or even 12 in certain very specific circumstances, but I won't bore you with the details. But each territory will have their own set of rules, and you just need to get somebody who knows the local rules. I think in the UK, whilst you might have to have a UK-based company, your employees can be based in the EEA region still. But what happens post-Brexit? You know, now we're in post-Brexit land, whatever that looks like. I'm not entirely sure how that will end up being. There's a further question here, which is, what is a good result for that first test? That's what we were saying about, we're looking for that first test to be under $40, so about under 30 pence, basically, for a mobile type game. We've actually seen the same level for a PC-based game. Now, obviously, it's a little bit more complicated to translate a PC game to the same level of cost per install as you would get on a mobile game. But now Steam have unlocked the ability to do ad tracking. We are really looking forward to exploring how we can use that technique on Steam directly. We actually have a client in mind. We just got to help them get their funding to finish their game. So that's the next process. Neil, you've asked us, thanks for the presentation. Is it easier to prove CTR and CPI test success for a hyper-casual game to a game that isn't hyper-casual? I don't think so. So click-through rate and cost per install rate, we can test that for any game. Like I said just now, it's not as clear-cut with PC games. It's much harder with console. There's basically no direct correlation with console. But it doesn't mean it's not relevant at all. It's just that it's a more of a general indicator of attractiveness rather than an indicator of cost per customer. So PC games will be more reliant on organic, on general PR, on event-based activity, on influencers, maybe than a mobile game will be, although mobile games are increasingly affected by influencers and to a lesser extent event-type activity. But with console, it's much more complicated. So it's not really about hyper-casual versus non-hyper-casual. It's more about the platforms you want the game to go on. So if you've got a game that's cross-platform, you might be able to immediately understand what likely cost per install and click-through rates are likely to be for that game in terms of the mobile platforms, but you might find it more complicated to apply that to what level of success you're going to get from others. Now, there are some tools out there that are looking very promising. So we're looking at Game Insight and we're looking at Steam Data Suite as two providers that we're looking to find ways of getting attribution level information from PC-based content, particularly Steam. So it's definitely a moving feast right now, but we are seeing some improvements in the possibility of targeting. In fact, we're actually talking to a couple of people at the moment who are maybe looking to us to try and see if we can do some market testing of that process. So we'll see if that comes out, and if we do get some information we can share, obviously we'll do so. Cool. Anything else? Hopefully that will make sense. So obviously, with all that in mind, I'm going to say, thank you to Adam for taking part and providing such clear answers and good insights to, what's going on in the kind of finance space. And frankly, it's really important to us, particularly because we were able to raise our pre-seed round with Adam. We've been able to unlock our possibility of being able to do publishing with Adam. And so obviously, as you can very imagine, we've got a really close relationship with Buzz. And, we love what we're doing. We're trying to make sure that we can help them, whether we find developers working directly with us or if we're helping developers find what Buzz can do for them. In the meantime, there are plenty of other things that we can help you with. If you don't already know, I think Simon does, I think a few others may do, we're doing a free game review where we're looking at games in terms of their market fit, their game mechanics, their retention design, and the monetization design. We're sharing that information with people. So basically, if we do a review on your game, we're going to share that with you. Hopefully that thumbs up from Simon means that he thinks that was quite a useful exercise. I'm sure he'll type away if he doesn't think that. But either way, feel free. So we do that anyway. We also currently doing an approach where one game per month that's submitted to us on our website, we're going to give a 3 hours workshop to. So helping them understand the targeting and success factors of their game and helping them think about how to target that more effectively. So there we are. Hopefully I've shared with you useful information about our UA testing process, how we're trying to break the glass ceiling by basically removing the subjectivity and looking at objective KPIs from the initial CPI, doing UX testing, doing net promoter scores, looking at retention, proving return on advertising spend, and then using that to repeat spend and to scale the game. That's how we're trying to break the glass ceiling. That's how we're trying to make it so that we can get developers who are working with us successful. But we think that's a process that any developer can do. You know, if you need help, you can go find it. But if you know about usability, if you know about ad design, if you know about good targeting, you know about how to use the platforms, then you can do it. And you should do it. And you should find ways to prove. And if finance is the thing that's holding you back, hopefully we've also given you some insight in a different way to look at it. I don't have to go out and beg, borrow, and steal to get money into the company through selling off equity of the game. I can instead look at debt as a relatively low cost way of fronting that cost. But let's not do that in a way that's reckless. Let's get some proof. Let's prove that we can deliver. Let's do that through objective testing. If anyone has any further questions, please feel free to type away. Otherwise, I'm going to say thank you very much. So on that note, thank you all. And like I say, feel free to reach out to us. Very happy to talk further if anyone's got any other questions. You can find Adam and I everywhere, but obviously LinkedIn is a very easy place to find us. You can find us on fundamentally.games, and also feel free to email hi@fundamentally.games. Also, you're all going to get a copy of the recording and slides, and I will also ping you out a link to our Discord channel, where it's a free space for people to come and talk about best practice for games in general, and happy to get chatting with you all. Good stuff. Thanks, everybody. Great talking to you. Have a great day.